All right, hi everyone. We'll get started. So my name is Jen Paruk, and I'm a PhD candidate at Michigan State University. And there's a long title on this slide, but what I'm going to talk about today is when an adult is at risk of harming themselves or someone else, what do their family members and intimate partners do to reduce firearm access? I want to say thanks to the GVRC who's putting on this excellent research day and who helped fund this dissertation research. My views expressed in this presentation don't necessarily reflect the views of the funding agencies. So as many of the speakers today have talked about, both those at risk of suicide and perpetrating interpersonal violence share a common intervention point: reducing access to firearms. And family members and partners are uniquely positioned to reduce firearm access. So first, people who are at risk of harming themselves or others sometimes indicate this intention beforehand, or families and partners might notice warning signs. Families and partners spend a lot of time with the person and might be able to notice changes over time. Families and partners also might be victims of the individual's threats or uses of violence. And additionally, even if they're not the owners of firearms in the home, they sometimes know where and how firearms are stored. This gives family and partners the opportunity to intervene and reduce firearm access. Indeed, family members and partners are sometimes recommended to reduce access. For example, some IPV survivor advocates have suggested that victims call law enforcement to try to get the firearm out of the house. Similarly, when a loved one is at risk of suicide, the National Suicide Hotline has urged third-party callers, including family and partners, to remove access to lethal means. However, even though they're recommended to reduce firearm access sometimes and are in this unique position to do so, we really don't know a lot about exactly how family and partners are reducing access for at-risk adults and when they're doing so. But it's really important to know this. By identifying how and when family and partners reduce access for adults at risk of harming themselves or others, interventions can then be crafted to increase the safety and efficacy in preventing firearm injury. Additionally, any legal obstacles can be studied and addressed. So this is my dissertation research, and the first aim I'm going to talk about today is identifying what family and partners are doing in a crisis moment and afterwards with police to reduce access. And then the second aim is to identify which of the incident and demographic level factors are the most important in predicting these efforts. So to address the first aim, I'm just looking at the chat. Okay, just want to make sure there's nothing there. To address the first aim, identifying what family and partners are doing. So I first conducted a content analysis using police reports that were in Florida extreme risk protection order cases. So if a law enforcement officer in Florida believes that someone's at risk of harming themselves or someone else and should be prevented from firearm access, they can submit an ERBO petition to the court. If the court grants that petition, the person is prevented from firearm access for up to 1 year. So in all of the cases I used, police had decided that someone was at risk of harming themselves or others and should not have access to a firearm for a temporary period of time. Many of these ERBO petitions included the police report from the original incident that led police to file. So for example, an officer would respond to a DV incident and then would file an ERBO petition afterwards and would include that original report in the petition. And so this is the data that I used for the study. So 473 of these original reports. So next, to identify the most important predictors. So in this analysis, I used incident and demographic variables that were already collected from these same ERBO reports. My co-author on this presentation, Dr. Zeoli, she was the PI on the study that collected all of this incident and demographic data. So there are a lot of potential variables to include. For example, if family and partners were the targets of use of violence or a threat of violence or use of firearm violence, all these different types of violence, if there was a suicide threat or attempt, if police were allowed to remove firearms from the scene. And so there's a lot of potential variables to use, and as there's no previous research guiding what variables to put into the model, and there's a lot of highly correlated variables, I used supervised machine learning. So first, I split the data into a training and testing set. So it was like one data set into two different data sets. And then with that training set, I ran 5 different models with 10-fold cross-validation and then combined them into one model. It's called an ensemble model. And then I tested that final model with the testing data set to find the predictive performance of the model, to see how well does it actually predict families and partners intervening. And so this combined model isn't going to explain the specific relationship between each of the variables and the outcome, kind of like how we typically think of like a logistic regression or something. This model is really just going to tell us what are the most important variables in making the prediction of whether family or partners reduce access. This is really useful for exploratory research when there's a lot of variables and we can identify what are important that we can then use in future analyses. So I'm going to present the preliminary findings from my dissertation. They have not been published yet, but preliminary findings from the content analysis. So what did families and partners do? Almost 15% of cases included that the family or partner intervened during the incident to reduce access. Many of these interventions included hiding the firearm or moving it during the incident so the adult who was at risk could not get it. Families and partners hid firearms in a myriad of places inside and outside the residence, including in closets, under the bed, in cars outside. Even one case was a recycling bin and a neighbor's backyard. They also sometimes moved the firearm to a more secure place, like a firearm safe. And some family and partners used physical force to reduce firearm access. For example, one woman slapped her suicidal son to get the shotgun away. Some family and partners tried to talk the at-risk adult down from the crisis moment or simply asked them to give them the gun. For example, one woman hugged her suicidal granddaughter and let her cry on her shoulder, which allowed another family member to remove the gun. It's important to note that some efforts to reduce access were not successful or resulted in the at-risk adult retaliating and fighting back. For example, one woman would not give her boyfriend his gun after he threatened suicide, and the boyfriend became upset that she wouldn't give him his gun, grabbed a butcher knife, and grabbed her by the throat. So approximately 1/4 of narratives included that family and partners reduced access with police afterwards. Some family and partners gave consent for police to remove firearms from the residence, like sometimes even giving specific descriptions of the guns or where they could be found within the residence. A small proportion of cases included that family and partners asked for help. For example, one wife requested that police take custody of the firearms until her husband could get mental health assistance. Some family and partners directly gave police officers firearms, just here. In some cases, police said that the family and partners were doing this freely, and in other cases, it was unclear from the report if family or partners were doing this because police were allowed to seize firearms in that situation, or if they were doing so freely. Finally, some reports included that partners and family would take actions after police left, including storing the firearm so that the person would not have access to it. So to address the second aim of the study, I then analyzed with the supervised machine learning, what are the most important factors in predicting family and partners reducing access with police. So this chart, I know it's really hard to read, please don't try to read it. It's really just a visual to show you the weighted importance of each variable in making the overall prediction of whether family and partners would intervene. So the most important predictors were the age of the at-risk adult, the amount of time that had passed since Florida enacted the law that began the ERPO process and allowed police to remove firearms in some situations, if the adult had possession of or access to more than one firearm, if the intimate partner or family lived with the at-risk person, and if police told someone on the scene about ERPOs or the ERPO process. And so as I said earlier, these variable importances don't explain the nature of the relationship between the variables and the family or partner reducing access. We can't say it's a positive or negative relationship. These variable importances simply measure the contribution of each variable to the model's overall predictive performance. So for example, if you took out one of these really important variables, the model's predictive performance would go down. The model had an overall accuracy of 66%, meaning that the model accurately predicted whether or not families and partners would reduce access in 66% of the cases that were in that testing data set that I used to test for the predictive accuracy. However, I want to note that the sensitivity was only 32%, meaning that the model correctly predicted 32% of family and partners intervening with police. So this is low, and it means that there are likely other variables out there that aren't included in this analysis that might be more important predictors. So there's lots to talk about, but I want to talk about two main points. First, family and partners intervened during the incident to reduce firearm access. But in doing so, whether they hid the firearm where others at risk could access it, or the at-risk person retaliated and fought back, family and partners sometimes put themselves and others at risk for injury. Second, we know from other research discussed today that law enforcement is consistently ranked as credible messengers. And in my findings, approximately a quarter of reports included that family and partners tried to reduce firearm access after the incident with police. And the model identified that police talking at the scene about ERPOs, about removing firearm access, is one of the most important predictors, meaning that there is potential to work with family and partners to reduce access and to study this more in detail in future studies. So several limitations. A major one I'm going to just talk about is these cases came from police reports that were in Florida ERPO cases. So there are many reasons why people do not contact the police or police don't write a report. And police respond to many, many incidents in Florida and write many reports, but then never, only submit a few for an ERPO case where police are requesting that the person be prevented from firearm access, like a small proportion of all of those incident cases. So the cases that I used in this study are likely pretty different than many other cases of interpersonal violence and suicide. However, this exploratory analysis is a great first step. Hopefully, it will give researchers information on what variables to examine in future studies for that specific relationship to family and partner efforts. Also, the machine learning models have low sensitivity, which means that we're missing a lot of what makes family and partners reduce access in this model. And future research should interview family and law enforcement officers to learn what could be causing family and partners to take action, like what else is there? It's also important to think about who might be a trusted messenger responding to the scene who aren't police officers. I was really enjoying listening to some of the conversations earlier, especially about EMS personnel responding at the scene. So there's lots of next steps on helping people immediately after the incident. And thank you so much. I can take any questions if anyone has any questions. Yeah, totally fine ending it. I know it's the end of the day. So thank you so much. I have really enjoyed listening to all the other presentations. Yep, and you are welcome. My email is here to email me afterwards if anything else comes up. All right, thank you.